So far, we've looked at vaults, bunny hop drives and ears, but Rabaska has one more trick up its sleeve. Welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers for an investigation into Rabaska's crystalline mysteries. Are they friend or foe? Why are they so weird? Let me bring you along on our voyage of crystal discovery. We first noticed these things when we were out trying to capture vaults. Occasionally, an angry angular crystal would spawn next to a vault we were fighting, and suddenly the battle would become much more difficult. Defense drones would flood out, our lasers would lock onto the crystal and blast it for basically no damage, and we'd have to resort to other weaponry. At one point, we were even starting to belt rockets out to turrets that were set to only attack the crystals because they seemed like that much of a danger. This calmed down a lot when we developed the yellow cards and started to capture the vaults a bit more quickly and a bit more thoroughly. This also coincided with a reliable supply of ammunition to the turrets around the vault, and suddenly the crystals basically stopped spawning. That was a relief at the time, although we didn't entirely understand the mechanics. Since then, we have of course realised that the crystals are useful, they just also need to be hacked. These crystals are actually called Vault Protection Pylons, and as the box text here says, they get built by the Vault Support Requester drones and then generate large numbers of additional drones to make our lives difficult. Fine. The Vault Support Requesters are spawned in by an unhacked Vault Access console, and the odds are shown by the pink line on the graph down here. This shows that there's up to a 13% chance of them being spawned in, if you get the evolution factor at exactly the right point. But even at 100%, which is where we were at the time, there's still a 2% chance of a spawned drone being a support requester. This honestly does not seem to be the case. We've had a lot of difficulty in convincing Rabaska to spawn crystals for us. We've tried hovering right over the vault, blasting drones as they appear. We've tried standing further away, out of laser range, in the hope that the combat drones will fly over to us to be dealt with. They do. And support drones will build something. And they don't seem to. Sometimes running away and coming back a few minutes later seems to help, but I think that's largely confirmation bias. It happened once or twice by coincidence, and my brain, desperate for a pattern to grab onto, went, aha! It certainly doesn't happen every time. We tried setting up turret walls near the vaults to try and churn through lots of drones, but none of these methods seem to work reliably enough for mass captures of the crystal. Do you know anything about how they work and how to get them to spawn reliably and quickly? Please let me know in the comments if you do. I do suspect that it's somewhat deliberately rare for them to appear. I imagine you're not meant to get enormous numbers of them for harvesting, and also not get too many when you're not really ready to fight them, but it has been a bit frustrating. In the end, the only thing that seemed to work was patience. Eventually, a crystal would appear and things would get messy. We reckoned the best strategy was to hit both the vault and the crystal with yellow hacking cards. The former because they hack quickly and that reduces the number of defense bots hanging around, and the latter because, well, hacking the crystals is what we're here for. When you hit the crystal with the yellow card, the blue Hack Progress bar appears behind its health bar, and you can see how it's progressing. This was another area where we had some issues. Sometimes the hack wouldn't stick, it would get partway through and then be reset. We wondered if this was due to incoming fire from the drones that spawned in, and so we were very careful to try and minimise the amount of time they hung around for, through the cunning use of more DACA. Eventually, typically after a couple of tries, the crystal would be hacked and things would calm down. Unlike the vaults, a crystal stays hacked and owned once captured, so we don't need to worry about maintenance. We can pick them up like any other building and harvest the 4 free pieces of energetic concrete. Great, so now we have a crystal. What was all that effort for? What can we do with them? Well, these pylons are the Rabaskan version of roboports and construction bots, and they've got their own unique twist which makes them extremely useful, but rather fiddly to get going with. When we picked up our first crystal, we unlocked Tier 1 of the Interplanetary Construction, and the name alone was enough to get us excited. This gave us the recipe for the warp inventory uplink, the ability to dismantle the crystals in a recycler, and also the ability to warp in buildings and tiles to ghosts. This was an amazing start. The uplink takes any items inserted into it and stores them in the warp inventory, a sort of shared inventory across all warp pylons, and warping in on ghosts means that if there's a construction ghost within the coverage area of a warp pylon, that item can be placed using the items in the warp inventory. Further research added in the ability to deconstruct and upgrade as well, and once we've been to Aquilo, we can research putting things in machines, like modules and presumably ingredients. In other words, this system allows you to teleport buildings from the uplink to anywhere else in the solar system by putting a warp pylon down there. It's construction bots without the travel time, and it works across different surfaces. That's amazing! I can place down a string of belts here on Rabaska and they'll just appear. Similarly, if I place down a crystal on Norvis, not forgetting to put down some energetic concrete first, I can place ghosts here too, and as long as the bots don't get there first, a building can appear by magic. You can see the potential of this system already. No need to transport building materials to a new planet, just teleport them in through warp space. This is amazing, but of course there are some downsides as well, to keep things balanced. At the top of the list is the building limitation of the uplink. It can only be placed on Rabaska. We can't just place one in the middle of the Norvis Mall and stream items to the rest of the solar system. So, for the time being, we have a couple of them on the planet, with the Lime spaceship dropping down supplies. In the future, we plan to add an additional ship keeping it supplied, and maybe even start constructing some of the buildings here where possible. Bulk construction will probably still be done from the Lime dropping supplies onto a planet, and then using bots in the traditional way, but this could be handy for little top-ups later. Another catch is that the crystals are expensive. They're difficult and slow to obtain, as we've discussed, and we haven't yet found a way to automate production. Apparently, in the next update of the mod, some changes have been made to targeting rules for turrets, which may help. But even then, however, I think it's still going to be a fairly manual process. The uplinks take some rare resources too. You need to recycle 2 crystals to get the warp cores required, and the warp cores are, volatile. They have a 2-hour spoil time, but we believe that when they spoil, you'll really know about it. Oh, and those 2 crystals? Yeah, they're still difficult to get. Finally, construction is fairly slow. On Norvis, we're used to a swarm of bots flying in like some kind of reverse locust. Once you've waited for them to arrive from the mall, building a massive area can be done in seconds. However, with the crystals, it's a few seconds per item. I don't think this is a problem. Okay, building a massive outpost could take a while, but it's not that bad, and given the travel time of bots, it's probably no slower on average. This is a pretty minor downside, and I believe that a big build would probably use multiple crystals anyway, so they'd work in parallel, and so I'm not too worried about this one. It's also worth noting in passing that there are a few planets that restrict imports, and this would probably be a powerful tool for avoiding that limitation, especially combined with a bunny hop drive. However, we're trying to balance our playthrough and approach planets as the author intended, at least as much as is reasonably possible, and so we would like to take care not to use this power when we shouldn't. As I said, building a warp uplink requires 10 warp cores, which are produced by recycling the crystal pylons. I dispatched most of the gang to go and obtain more crystals to get the system working, although I think most of them were harvested by Tristan and Sophia. Being very careful, I then recycled a pair of the crystals to get the warp cores out, and then used the plus 100% productivity magic of the machining assembler to turn them into a pair of warp uplinks. The first is over here by the machining assembler production to make those available wherever we might need them. We've got a chest full here, and they're being passed into the uplink by an inserter. The uplinks act as a blue chest to any nearby roboport, but sadly not automatically requesting any items which are needed for building, but missing from warp space. However, they can be programmed manually, like a blue chest. It also contains a logistics signal that displays all of the items stored in the warp inventory, which I've been calling Hammerspace because I've watched too many cartoons and it feels appropriate. Weirdly, you can't connect a signal cable to the uplink. However, the warp inventory content logistics group is made available and can be selected on a constant combinator and then passed out to wherever you want to use it, in this case the inserter loading the machining assemblers. You'll notice that there are quite a few more signals of items in Hammerspace than just the machining assemblers though. The black signal tells us how much room is left, sort of. Apparently, the warp inventory can hold up to 512 stacks, and the black signal is 512 minus the number of different types of items in there. So, as long as you don't put more than a full stack of anything into Hammerspace, it'll let you know how much room is left there. Well, we reckon that the build speed of the pylons is slow enough that we can probably keep it fed with a single inserter, so we're not too worried about that. You might also notice there are some iron plates in there. That's a bit awkward. I think they must have ended up in there because a belt or machine containing some plates got deconstructed, but now there's no way for us to get them back out again. We can only construct buildings and flooring. After the Aquilo upgrade, I expect us to be able to load them directly into a machine's input, but until then I believe they're stuck there. Again, let me know in the comments if you have a good idea to get rid of them. So this is definitely going to be something we're going to have to be careful about. No deconstructing belts with anything on them. The rest of the inventory, well, that's using a slightly more complicated system. Up north by the landing pad, Tristan has placed a combinator set with various shopping lists of the things we'd like to have available through the warp system. The bottom section is the actual current content, but notice that it's been multiplied by -1. This means that the current content is subtracted from the desired content, leaving anything that's missing as a positive number. All this maths is done automatically inside the combinator, very conveniently, and then passed out on the red cable to this inserter, where any positive signals are set as a filter. Currently the filter is set to null, but as soon as there's a shortage of anything, the filter will be set and those items will be thrown into the uplink. That's nice and easy, but since this is the planet of ears, we'd like to make those buildings available as well. That's the rest of this logic. Once again, we have a shopping list in a constant combinator with the warp inventory subtracted from it. Anything that's missing will show as a positive number, and that's fed into the adjacent machining assembler down the green cable to set the recipe. The ingredients for that recipe are then sent up the red cable to the inserter on the landing pad to pull out the machines that are to be upgraded. These get dropped onto the belt and then into this chest, and to prevent overload, the contents of the chest are negated here and passed to the inserter as well to cancel out the requests from the assembler. There's also a supply of Harine gas available at the top, and ears, both full core for buildings and sub-core for inserters, at the bottom. That is enough to fit the ears to a machine and then drop it onto the blue belt to disappear into Hammerspace. The tricky part comes once we've built enough of that machine. The machining assembler shuts down, the recipe is unset, and so it needs to get rid of its inventory. That's why there are additional ears, inserters and chests. The unused cores can be unloaded into these and then loaded back in again by priority for the next build. The other things are trickier. At the top is another combinator with the ears parts shopping list saved in it. This is connected to a randomizer and then to the top inserter. The randomizer cycles through all of the things that the machining assembler might have made. Well, I say cycles through, it's random, but given that it changes every tick, the odds of any of the relatively small number of items in the signal not being selected in any given second is pretty small. This will pull out any ears buildings, and the inserter in the lower left uses a similar system to pull out any source buildings, using a memory cell which remembers every type of item that's been in the chest, and another randomizer since they won't all fit into the inserter's filters. It's perhaps not the most elegant of systems, but in the absence of wildcards, such as anything with an ears module, or anything that doesn't have an ears module and is not itself an ears module, this is quite a nice compact system. Any new types of building or belt that we want to have available will have to be manually added to the shopping list, much like the logistics handover area in the Norvis Mall, but once they've been added, they will be available wherever there's a crystal, with no extra work required, and thanks to the named logistics sections, only have to be edited in one place. I'm looking forward to playing with this system in the future. We just need to get hold of enough crystals to make it useful, ideally without spending hours staring at unfriendly vaults. Come back and join us on stream on Monday from 7:30 PM UK time to see what we're doing with the crystals and where we've gone now that we've finished on Rabaska. If you'd like to try your hand with the crystals and everything else yourself, then you can grab the Planetary Pioneers mod from the Factorio mod portal. Use the seed 11111 to get your own copy of our solar system and let us know on the Discord server how you get on. I'll also be back for a solo stream on Wednesday at 8, and there'll be videos coming out every Thursday and Friday as well. There's always lots happening on the channel, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.